Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the check in front of her, $1 million made out in her name, signed by Maxwell Kingston, the tech billionaire whose table she'd waited on just 3 weeks ago. Her tiny apartment suddenly felt like it was spinning. This couldn't be real. The courier who delivered it stood awkwardly by her door, waiting for her signature on the delivery confirmation. "Is this some kind of joke?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her daughter coughing in the next room, a cough that had grown worse despite medications they could barely afford. "No joke, ma'am," the courier replied. "Mr. Kingston's office sent it personally." Sarah thought back to that night at Bellini's, where she'd been working double shifts to cover her daughter's medical bills. Kingston had been celebrating some massive business deal, drinking expensive champagne with his entourage. When they'd left, she discovered $1,000 in cash tucked under a plate, far more than the already generous tip he'd left on his credit card. What Kingston couldn't have known was that instead of keeping that money, despite desperately needing it herself, Sarah had chased him down the street to return it. The memory of Kingston's face when she'd handed him back the money flashed in her mind. He'd seemed genuinely shocked, staring at her as though she were an alien creature. "Why would you return this?" he'd asked, looking genuinely confused. "You could have easily kept it." "I wouldn't have known." Sarah had simply shrugged, exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. "It wasn't mine to keep," she'd replied. "And my daughter deserves to know her mother does what's right, even when it's hard." She'd turned to walk away when his voice stopped her. "Wait. What's wrong with your daughter?" Sarah clutched the check tighter, sinking onto her worn couch. Kingston had listened to her story that night, about Emma's rare respiratory condition, about the insurance that wouldn't cover the experimental treatment, about the 3 jobs she worked to make ends meet. He'd nodded thoughtfully, asked for her full name, and walked away. She'd thought that was the end of it. Now, 3 weeks later, this check had appeared, along with a handwritten note: "The world has enough people who take what isn't theirs. Your daughter deserves her chance, and so do you." That morning had begun like any other, Emma's breathing treatments at 5 a.m., a hurried breakfast of whatever was on sale that week, followed by dropping Emma at her mother's apartment before rushing to her morning shift at the diner. Sarah's shoes had holes she'd patched with duct tape, hidden beneath her black work pants. Her refrigerator had been nearly empty, save for Emma's medication and some milk that was about to expire. She'd been 3 months behind on rent, the eviction notice tucked away in her dresser drawer where Emma wouldn't find it. Each night, after tucking her daughter into bed, Sarah would sit at their tiny kitchen table calculating and recalculating numbers that never added up to enough. The doorbell rang again, startling Sarah from her thoughts. Standing outside was a tall woman in an expensive suit, holding a leather portfolio. "Ms. Walker? I'm Eleanor Voss, Mr. Kingston's personal attorney. May I come in? There are some conditions regarding the money we need to discuss." Sarah felt her heart drop. Of course there were conditions. Nothing in life came without strings attached, especially not from one of the world's richest men. With trembling hands, she opened the door wider, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. "It's not what you're thinking," Eleanor said, noticing Sarah's expression as she sat down at the tiny kitchen table. "Mr. Kingston was deeply moved by your integrity. But he's been burned before by his generosity." She opened her portfolio and slid out a document. "This money comes with only one requirement: you must give 10% of it away to someone else in need. Someone you choose, someone whose life you want to change, just as Maxwell is changing yours. He believes in creating chains of generosity." Sarah stared at the document, relief washing over her. She could do that, easily. But as she reached for a pen, Eleanor placed a hand on the papers. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice lowering. "Maxwell Kingston is dying. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors give him less than 6 months." Sarah gasped. The billionaire's gaunt appearance suddenly made sense. "He's giving away much of his fortune before he goes, but only to people who have demonstrated extraordinary character. People like you. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the gleaming hallway of Kingston Medical Research Center, holding Emma's hand as they walked toward the pediatric wing. The experimental treatment had worked better than anyone expected, and Emma's condition was in remission. The $1 million had paid for her treatment, allowed Sarah to quit 2 of her jobs, and move them to a safe apartment close to the hospital. As promised, she'd given $100,000 to Jorge, the dishwasher at Bellini's whose son needed surgery for a congenital heart defect. The remaining money was carefully invested, ensuring Emma's future education. Emma skipped alongside her, a sight Sarah had never thought possible. Before the treatment, her daughter had barely been able to walk to the bathroom without gasping for breath. Now, Emma's cheeks were flushed with healthy color, her small hand warm in Sarah's. "Mom, do you think Mr. Kingston will like the picture I drew for him?" Emma asked, clutching her artwork in her free hand, a colorful drawing of herself playing outside, something she'd never been able to do before the treatment. The simple question brought tears to Sarah's eyes. How could she explain to an 8-year-old the magnitude of what had happened, how one person's decision had completely altered the trajectory of their lives? "Ms. Walker," called a voice from behind them. Sarah turned to see Dr. Harrison, Emma's specialist, hurrying toward them. "I'm glad I caught you. We've just received the latest test results." Sarah's heart froze. Had the disease returned? Was this brief happiness about to be snatched away? Emma squeezed her hand tighter, sensing her mother's fear. "The results confirm it," Dr. Harrison continued, his face breaking into a wide smile. "Emma's markers are completely normal. We've never seen such a complete response to the treatment before. We'd like to publish a case study, with your permission." As they celebrated this news, Sarah's phone rang. It was Eleanor Voss. "Sarah, Maxwell is asking for you. He doesn't have much time left. Could you come to his estate this afternoon?" The request stunned her. She'd never expected to actually meet Kingston again, had assumed her story was just one of many acts of charity for the dying billionaire. "Of course," she replied, her voice catching. "We'll come right away." Kingston's estate was massive, a sprawling mansion overlooking the Pacific. Security ushered Sarah and Emma through elaborate gardens to a sunlit room where Maxwell Kingston lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by medical equipment. He looked even thinner than Sarah remembered, his once imposing frame now fragile, but his eyes lit up when they entered. "The honest waitress," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And this must be Emma. Come closer, please." The room smelled of antiseptic and expensive cologne, a strange combination that somehow captured the contradiction of this powerful man reduced to frailty. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the ocean stretched endlessly, white-capped waves catching the afternoon sun. Medical equipment beeped steadily, monitoring the failing body of a man who had once seemed invincible in business headlines. Sarah noticed photographs on the bedside table, Kingston in his youth, alongside people who must have been his parents, Kingston receiving awards, Kingston standing alone on a yacht. No pictures of a wife or children. No family waiting anxiously in the hallway. "I wanted to thank you personally," Kingston said, gesturing weakly for them to sit in chairs by his bed. "Not for returning the money, though that was remarkable, but for reminding me of something important at the end of my life." He paused, gathering strength. "I've made billions, built companies, owned yachts and planes and homes on every continent. But in my final days, none of that matters. What matters are the choices we make when no one is watching, the integrity we show when we could easily take the easy path." Emma, with the directness only children possess, asked, "Are you scared to die?" The question hung in the air. Kingston smiled sadly. "Less scared than I was before meeting people like your mother. She showed me that goodness exists without expectation of reward. That's something worth believing in at the end. What happened next would change everything." Kingston's monitor began to beep rapidly, and he clutched at his chest. Medical staff rushed in, pushing Sarah and Emma back. "Get them out of here," a nurse ordered. As security escorted them from the room, Kingston called out weakly, "The envelope, give them the envelope." Eleanor appeared beside them, guiding them to a sitting room and handing Sarah a sealed envelope. "He wanted you to have this, no matter what happened today." Inside was a letter and another document. The letter, written in Kingston's unsteady hand, read, "Sarah, if you're reading this, our time was shorter than I hoped. You returned $1,000 to me when you had every reason to keep it. Your integrity moved me to give you $1 million. Now, I'm entrusting you with something far more valuable. Emma's treatment wasn't just lucky, it was revolutionary. I've purchased the patents for the technology behind it and established a foundation to make it available to every child with her condition. I'm naming you as the foundation's director, with an annual salary of $250,000. Your experience as both a parent and someone of unimpeachable character makes you perfect for ensuring this treatment reaches those who need it most. My lawyers will explain everything. This is my true legacy, not buildings or business deals, but lives changed through a chain of kindness that began with a waitress who did what no one expected." Sarah's hands shook as she read the letter, tears blurring the words. Emma crawled into her lap, wrapping small arms around her mother's neck. "Is Mr. Kingston going to heaven?" she whispered. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. In the next room, medical staff worked frantically, but the steady tone of a flatlined heart monitor told them what words couldn't. Maxwell Kingston, once the 18th richest person in the world, had taken his final breath, not surrounded by business associates or distant relatives hoping for a mention in his will, but in the presence of a waitress who had once returned his money and her daughter whose life he had saved. 1 year later, Sarah stood at a podium, addressing the opening ceremony of the first Kingston Treatment Center. Behind her stood Emma, healthy and strong, alongside Jorge and his son Miguel, now fully recovered from his surgery. "Mr. Kingston taught me that kindness creates ripples we may never see," Sarah told the audience. "Today, we're opening the first of 20 centers worldwide that will provide free treatment to children with conditions once considered untreatable. And it all began with a simple choice, to return money that wasn't mine." The audience included families from across the country, many clutching photographs of children who hadn't survived long enough to benefit from the treatment now freely available. Sarah had insisted that the center's waiting room display these photographs, a reminder of what was at stake in their work. Among the crowd sat former co-workers from Billionaire's, including the manager who had once written Sarah up for being late after Emma's breathing treatments ran long. Now he looked at her with pride and perhaps a touch of astonishment at the transformation. As she looked out at the crowd, Sarah could almost imagine Kingston standing there, that quizzical expression on his face that he'd worn when she'd chased him down the street. The foundation now employed over 100 people, many of them parents of children who'd received treatment. Each employee was required to designate 10% of their salary to a cause of their choosing, creating an ever-expanding web of generosity. On her wrist, Sarah wore a simple bracelet made of blue string, Emma's handiwork. It was a daily reminder of how close she had come to losing everything that mattered. Sometimes, late at night when the foundation work was done and Emma was sleeping peacefully without the oxygen tank that had once dominated her bedroom, Sarah would sit on their balcony overlooking the city and wonder what would have happened if she had kept that $1,000. One decision, made in a moment of exhaustion and integrity, had altered countless lives. Maxwell Kingston could have simply been another rich man who died alone, Sarah concluded. Instead, he created a legacy that will save thousands of lives. And he did it because a simple act of honesty showed him another way to measure wealth. If that story touches you, I hope you'll share it. Because in a world that often rewards taking what isn't yours, we need reminders that integrity matters. The greatest inheritance we can leave isn't money, it's the example we set through our choices when facing life's most difficult moments. As Sarah stepped away from the podium to thunderous applause, she knew Kingston had been right. The choices we make when no one is watching define us. Sometimes, those choices can change not just our own lives, but create waves of change that continue long after we're gone. And that, she thought as she hugged her healthy daughter, was the most unexpected gift of all.